I have often been told that a life of duty makes a man unfit for ordinary grief. I have known duty in its most consuming form, the steady, exacting weight of office, the daily tally of lives and laws, the invisible ledger in which a president keeps the nation's debts against his own flesh. But the ledger at the foot of my bed was written in a different hand. There, in the small darkness between child and country, I learned that dedication can cleave 1 to 2 masters at once, one public and enormous, the other intimate and relentless. When Willie died, the house learned silence as if for the first time. Mary's hands, always quick with a seam and a scolding, lost their speed. I remember finding one of his shirts folded on the chair, the collar still softened by a small, impossible child's heat. I remember lifting it to my face, as if scent could conjure breath. The war pressed at my shoulders. Telegrams arrived with new fatalities as punctures in the map of my days. Yet the most painful wounds were those that opened without fanfare beside my own hearth. I will not hide the fact that I could be a man of resolute, sometimes brittle reason. I have been mocked for my melancholy, for the long hours when I sat alone considering things that seemed to most mere gloom. But grief does not respect the categories you teach boys, public and private. Mary turned toward the latter with a hunger I could not soothe. Lectures and reassurances were like securing a door against a storm where the storm had already passed through. She sought other doors. She read, she questioned, and she listened to voices she had not acknowledged before. At first I thought it a disorder of sorrow, a mind bereaved and seeking consolation in any phrase. Later, as seasons wore, I saw that her searching was also an exertion of the same fierce devotion that had made her an ardent defender of our family, only now the cause she championed was reunification rather than policy. She resolved to reach across the small gulf that separated her from Willie. I confess I did not resist as I might once have. My mind, too, searched for a bridge. I found myself waking in the night with an ache behind my sternum like the memory of a hand closed in mine. I wrote letters in the dark and left them unsent. I recited scripture and legal precepts, and found in each a kind of consolation, but not the consolation Mary sought. It was Eli Parker who first offered what could be called a different path. Eli had served me with uncommon loyalty and a steady intellect that was tempered by a different tradition than my own. He was, I think, fond of me as a man and respectful of the office I bore. He knew grief as a universal thing, but understood the particular ways that cultures keep it. He spoke once, in private, of his people's stories of dreams, of walkings in the night mind, of voices in other directions that yet felt like home. For Eli, these were not fictions to dismiss, but tools of meaning. Mary took to the idea as if it were a plank thrown to a drowning woman. I watched debates of reason and desperation craft themselves in her face. She wrote to women who held seances in parlors lit with candles. She read pamphlets that claimed tongues of the dead. Eli offered us what, to them, was a more ancient prescription, a kind of attentiveness to dreams, and to the ways a soul might travel when the body slept. He cautioned against superstition. His people respected certain deaths and listened to certain dreams. He did not promise miracles. When he spoke of dream walking, it was with the economy of someone who had observed human need in the creative ways it had sometimes been answered. So we sought. We were not in truth strange pioneers of belief. In Washington there were always those who believed more and those who believed less. But there is a particular humility in a man who has to account for thousands of lives to admit that he cannot account for the small constancy of his own heart. I, along with Mary, began to learn a patient attention to the edge between waking and sleep. I sat with my face set to the dusk and promised myself that if a way existed to see Willie again, I would take it. Not out of vanity, but out of love. I remember one night slipping into a sleep that felt neither wholly dream nor plain rest. I cannot say I crossed any threshold with torches or rites. If there was ritual, it was the ritual of ceasing to clench. In that indifferent hour, I felt myself loosen. A presence came. Not a detailed vision, but a deep recognition, like touching the familiar fur of an old coat. The face I saw was not formed by my imagination alone. It had the small, knobby chin Willie had, the bright, narrow forehead he used to tilt when asking a difficult question. I reached, and his hand was in mine for a moment, as certain as a pulse. Others would later tell stories of seeing me in strange rooms and at far edges of the battlefield, of a tall, melancholy figure at windows and in the slow creeps of fog. They would speak of my ghost, and newspapers would supply a dozen versions of what went unmeasured. I think now, with the coolness of a man who has watched storms and then cleared them, that many of these sightings were not hauntings in the old notion, but something less theatrical and perhaps truer. There is a slender truth in thinking of consciousness not as confined to the ribs, but as sometimes slipping free when fear or duty loosens its grip. If I have a belief to give to any sober reader, it is this: perhaps those apparitions were not spirits conjured by grief, but the same loosened self I once felt, a mind slipping its tether and visiting the houses of those it loved. In my own case, I am left with the melancholic consolation that I might have walked, for moments, without the name men later gave it. Call it ghost, or call it the long, old human habit of following the heart after it has been cut. Call it dream walking, if you will. We had no word then for that quiet traveling. Perhaps the world had less vocabulary for some interior motions, and yet the motion was no less true. I was present in places where my body was not, and my presence was nothing to the records of state, but everything to the small family that kept my name at their table.